This is Beth McGinnis. I'm here at Samford University on September 12th, 2019, with Lloyd Bricken, the director of the Great Crossroads Project. Thanks for being with me today, Lloyd.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I have so many questions about this wonderful project, but first I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about your musical and personal background and the story of your life that led you to this place of becoming interested in this particular music.
Okay, well, I've always been, I've always worked as an, since I was a very young man, I worked as an actor, a professional actor from a pretty early age, and then I went on to create a theater company in New Mexico during the years that I was in university, and then went on to work as a professional actor in the Bay Area, San Francisco, which went really, really well. This was like in 2001, but the whole time there was this creeping feeling of, well, and so what? Kind of from every performance, and this was in contrast to the fact that like I was getting role after role after role with the best companies in the city, so it was like, well, I should feel successful, right? But there was this sense of, well, but where does it all go? Like we sometimes have these incredible experiences, working as a company together, but then the performance is finished and it stops. I was hungry for something that I couldn't yet name, which was like some possibility that would be able to work with the possibilities of the performing arts, like with theater and music, dance, that would be more continuous and more therefore also transformative. I was hungry to work with a master in this way, but I couldn't find anybody like this. Well, in my professional field in that area, but I revisited in the fall of that year the writings of Jerzy Grotowski. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. So he's this Polish theater genius who also left the theater after great worldwide success, and started researching the possibilities of the performing arts, you could call them, or performative techniques that exist in various religious traditions around the world. And he was asking these questions like, well, if we look at what they do in Kathakali, if we look at what they do in India, if we look at what they do in various rituals in Japan, in various rituals in Haiti, if I bring masters from these various traditions and we work together, can we find something that would be like, I don't know, behind the differences? Is there something that these things are all striving for? What is that? What are they trying to touch? And maybe we won't find something that goes together. But so Grotowski, I was diving into his writings in that year, and it was causing the crisis to gather for me. So I was like, well, he's dead, right? He died a few years ago, but there's got to be people that are still working with him. And I found out, so there's this place called the Work Center of Jerzy Grotowski, and his disciples who worked with him in the last 30 years of his life are still continuing. So I immediately wrote to the Work Center, and I was like, I want to come work with you. It took them several months to get back to me, and they were like, we're not looking for anybody right now, but we'll put you on our mailing list. Nice to meet you over email. So that was that. I also had the kind of coincident experience in those months of my father's death, which created this, I don't know, like the kind of opening that happens in a way with grief, where you just have this tremendous longing for home, or what is that? Yeah. I really wanted to come back to the Deep South in any case. So I didn't really know why, but I came back after some time, visit my father's grave in rural Tennessee, and a while back, I ended up connecting with some other musicians that I grew up with here, and they had a band that was about to have a national tour, and they were like, "Lloyd, join us." So I jumped back on the into musical life, working with an alternative rock band basically, but traveling the country. And when we were not on tour, I found myself coming back into Birmingham, and one time I was down at the library, the downtown public library. I started going through old records, and I pulled out some records that I didn't understand what they meant on there, but they were part of like old recordings from the 1930s and 40s. One of them that was just like, what is this? It just said Parchment Farm 1945 on it. And I was like, So I took it home, put it on my record player, and proceeded to have, I don't know, some kind of epiphany. That from the first notes of hearing this recording, these are prisoners. Parchment Farm is the largest of the prison farms in the Deep South, where basically like the conditions of slavery never finished. You know, I mean it's laid right out there in the 13th Amendment. Like, okay, slavery's finished, but if you're in prison, we can do what we like to with you, and it's no accident that the prison industrial complex starts getting created right at that moment. And Parchment Farm was known around the Deep South, as I've learned since then, like to be the most savage and the worst of anywhere. If you went to Parchment, it was a death sentence. So regardless of whether you were there for lifetime or not, you know, you probably wouldn't leave anyway. But the music that came out of there, the recordings that were done there by John Lomax and then his son Alan Lomax, who then returned there after some time. So I got fascinated with all of this history. I started to find other old recordings of the Lomaxes from Alabama, from other places. And then I was like, well, you know, sometimes I have free weekends. Let's find out where things are still going on in the States. So I started taking almost every weekend that I could over a period of about 3 years, and went to countless numbers of churches around Alabama, Mississippi. I discovered the incredible culture of the Gullah Geechee cultures on the Georgia Sea Islands. Went out there a couple of times. I've now been out there like 4 or 5 times. Mm-hmm. And so during that process of investigating this, not really knowing what I was doing, I started learning songs too, and started creating my own, I guess you could call them like acting pieces in relation to some of these songs too, because sometimes it would provoke various memories or other types of things for me, and that would be in relation with this song for me. Yeah. But again, I didn't know what I was doing with all of it. Had no idea. The work center is still not answering me. Had some feeling that was gonna be, that's where I'm headed, but had to wait a while. And then these questions, it was like a research that I was getting involved in, basically. Nobody was sponsoring me or anything like that, but so things would happen, like I remember this church in Montgomery County, where it was like old black, old lined out hymns. And then there was, someone got up and led a song, and then another woman got up and led the second song after this, and she just kind of erupted out of I was sitting toward the back of the congregation, and something it was like the temperature and the pressure just shifted in the room. Like physically everything changed. It's hard to describe. It was as if something grabbed her, you know? And she just kind of went up in this flame. But and the whole process lasted about 2 minutes. But what was incredible to me was the way in which pretty much everyone in the congregation, like, got up and articulated around her and moved with her. So the song was taking place in the bodies of the people and articulating around it and in it and through it. That's what is the song. Not just her voice or what she's singing, but the song was moving through all them. And I mean, I was like, you know, all the hairs were standing up on the back of my neck, and I was just absolutely blown away. And I thought to myself after this, I was like, well, if you could do that again, if you could repeat that, what is it to repeat that? But if you could do that again, you maybe would have the basis for a whole new kind of theater. What would that be? So there were these kinds of questions. So that kind of working with a song in that way, doing it again, so to speak, that's what the Work Center works on. So I did finally get into the Work Center, worked with Mario Biagini and Thomas Richards, the heads of the Work Center, and was selected to come be part of a new group over there in 2007. And then spent about 9 years consistently over there. So this is a long story, but so I'll stop. But so okay. This became then the Work Center. We work 6 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day on our craft, and then you go home and you do the administrative work of the theater. So it's like a nonstop process of work, and. Yeah, so this was my life of developing the potentials of this particular craft. I'm not sure what to call it. It's obviously it's not exactly theater. Sometimes I use the term devised theater here. Peter Brook, maybe a name that you know. I don't know. The famous theater director from France who worked in tandem with Grotowski. He coined the term art as a vehicle for certain subtle processes to become alive in a human being, as the kind of work that Grotowski was doing. And I can say that that's something that I'm still aiming for in what I do.
That's a beautiful story, and I can tell it's only the beginning, only the surface of the story. How did you connect with the Brazilian musicians?
So you met Luciano Mendes de Jesus, this Luciano, see I say his name wrong. Luciano, you met Luciano this summer. So Luciano was in the Work Center with me. He joined in 2012 and came over and started his apprenticeship with the company. We did a selection for new members in 2012 in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and we were on there were 2 different extended trips to Brazil in those years with the Work Center, because we would go and we would tour our performances to some big cities and things like this, but we would also do these extended residencies in villages and other places. So we were learning and people were learning with us. You know, that was always the more exciting thing than just doing the performances. So I met Luciano there, and he lived with me in this little Italian village for some years. And then around the same time that I decided to move back to the States and move back to Alabama, Luciano wanted to finish his PhD in Brazil. So he went back to Brazil, I came back to Alabama, and we've stayed in touch. And his question, really from the last year he was still involved overseas with us at the Work Center, was like, well, if I go, because we were working with what we call the Southern songs, with these songs from down here in the Deep South here. But Lou was thinking, well, if I go back to Brazil now, like, look what Lloyd did. I mean, he went to these different places. Like, that's got to happen. That's clearly the same kind of thing here in Brazil. So he ended up diving into all of that and researching into these different places in Minas Gerais, going on these different journeys and trips to find, if he could, living masters of the Visunga still, because it's a tradition that's almost gone, you know, in terms of there being people that are still singing it, that were taught by their grandfathers and the grandfathers and the grandfathers, you know. as you know too, like it's really a worldwide die-off that we're seeing of these types of things. The Basingas just being one tradition among many, 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 many. So it's very precious. It's a precious time to be able to be involved in something like this. So Lou started sharing his the results of his and the excitement of his journey into all this with me. And we started talking like, well, what could be our collaboration going forward? So a year before this summer, he had written grants for me to come to Sao Paulo, where he lives, and I taught down there at it's called SESCI. It's a little bit like their Tisch School of the Arts in. I would make that comparison because Sao Paulo is a little bit like New York in Brazil. And so I taught an intensive there, but then Lou and I were also co-directing a new group of people in Sao Paulo with the objective of over a month, like to create a whole new theatrical piece and then perform it and produce it by the end of the month, which is what we did. And the whole thing by the end, this was in 2018. And it really started to take off by the end of the summer and was so exciting. And so even before I got on the plane to fly back to America, we were like, well, what about part 2? Let's go to Alabama. So we started working on the grant the day before I left, which eventually we got and brought them here this year. Yeah.
Wow. You've both been exploring your own roots, but the roots, such deeper and broader roots as well. And I maybe should have asked this question early on, but tell me about growing up. Now, you keep saying back to Alabama, but you buried your father in rural Tennessee.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Well, my father left us when I was 11, 12, and we didn't really have any contact with him after that. So, but in the wake of my parents splitting up and his disappearance, my mother moved up to. We were living in Florida, and but my mother wanted to be closer to her family. So she's from rural Alabama, but her mom was in Mobile. Her sister was in Birmingham. She applied for. She's a teacher and a public school teacher, and she applied for jobs in Birmingham and got a position here in Birmingham. So we moved to Birmingham.
Yeah.
And so I grew up mostly here.
Okay.
Yeah, from like 12.
Yeah.
So I went to high school here and everything.
Yeah, which high school?
Yeah, I went to Mount Brook.
Okay, yeah.
So pretty close to
Okay,
Sanford.
yeah, pretty close.
And then got away from the South, as soon as I could afterwards. Went to college in Santa Fe, New Mexico at St. John's College.
Okay, yeah. That rings a bell.
A great book school.
Is it? Yes, that's the bell that it rings.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great curriculum. That was, wow.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm going back there a little less than a month right now. I've got a whole program I'm taking to St. John's at the moment.
That is so exciting.
Yeah. A little homecoming.
Yeah. Well, you've got lots of homecomings going on. But did that great books education inform the work that you do now?
Absolutely, no question. I mentioned that I work as a tutor.
Yeah.
Also, and particularly when I work with young people, that even when I am working with young people who are high school students and things like this, and they have this set curriculum, I'm kind of constantly weaving the classics into everything that I'm doing. Yeah. It informed so much. Also about just the background of everything, apart from the content itself of the classics and of the different thinkers and researchers the great ones, the Western canon that we study there, is also the rigor of the St. John's program has had a huge impact on me.
Sure.
You can't fool around, there at all. It's there's they only bring in about 110 120 people a year, and you have these small group classes. And from pretty much my first 2 or 3 days there, I mean, I was already really in love with the ideal of St. John's before I went there. But then in just the first few days of being there, I was like, whoa, I gotta step up my game, get on this. But there are so many authors, so many thinkers that come up with the work that I do now. Last summer in Brazil, Luciano and I worked with translations of Walt Whitman, of William Blake, of Edgar Allan Poe. Funny, we used all these, English authors, but they were saying the things that we wanted to say at that time with the performance. So philosophy had a lot to do with my education coming into this, and the study of classic languages also, which I went even further than the St. John's program per se, in terms of doing extra summer intensives for ancient Greek, because I was really deeply interested in being able to take that further at the time, and to be able to read the Gospels fluently, or as fluently as possible, and Homer.
Yeah.
Yeah, which are two different kinds of ancient Greek.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. That brings up so many questions. Before we switch gears a little bit and talk specifically about the performances that you've recently done in Alabama, I wonder, you said something early on about spiritual practice and connecting your work in theater to spiritual practice, and now you just said I wanted to be able to read the Gospels in the original language. So you clearly want to go deep with that. Could you tell me a little bit about the connection of your own spiritual practices to your artistic work?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the story that I started to tell at the beginning of this interview, I mean, that in a way that's what it all boiled down to for me, was that I needed a situation where my spiritual practice and others' spiritual practice could go together with the exploration of artistic craft. That's what I was looking for. And in many ways that's so yes, the background of the Work Center was essential for all of this. So Grotowski, after this investigation into these different religious traditions that I was talking about, because also beyond the question of what's beyond the different outward differences around the world, what is it? There are differences in language, there are differences in what we call this. What is the quality of what it is we're trying to touch? What's the experience that's trying to be arrived at with these various different means? So all those were questions. And then another question was, okay, now that he was experiencing a lot of them, what's one that you maybe don't need to go to the monastery for 35 years to be able to start to understand? What's one that what could work the best for everyday people in the West? And what Grotowski came down on, and for him was the best, was the Afro-Caribbean songs of Haiti and other traditions from around there. So a whole Vaudoun group was brought wholesale to Italy to be continuing their work and influencing a new, younger generation of artists in the early 80s in Italy. So this was the beginning of the Work Center. And that's what happened. So this younger generation started learning all these songs, hundreds of them, and then eventually we're developing performances with Grotowski's aid out of these types of things. So, and these performances are not what we would think of as something that's done for the public, because it's something that's done for each other and for something else, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that can be seen, but it isn't, let's say, to be seen.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
So it's really on this edge between something that is public, potentially public, but is ritual also,
Yeah.
right? But like and I'm happy to to find a way that we could watch a video of one of these older performances or something like this, because something like Action, which was the name of this original piece that evolved there for many years at the Work Center in the early years, absolutely was utterly and completely repeatable. They could finish it and do it again. Was not like depending on certain emotional states or anything else like this.
Context.
Just absolutely, that's the level of not only professionality, but of depth and penetration into the material that they had achieved after many years.
Yeah.
Very, very, very powerful. So something that approaches a kind of objectivity. We everybody that was, let's say, that was brought into the new team, when I started in 2007, and we were from all different kinds of countries from around the world, with lots of different backgrounds and with many different kinds of desires. But we started working on, like I said, old songs from down here in the Deep South, which was my desire. I brought that to Mario and was like, if I'm going to join, this is what I want to do. And he was like, okay. Because I think he was drawn to some of this material himself, and he just allowed me to do that in all of my messiness in the first year or two of doing this. And so my colleagues and I started working on that material, and then we were also working with the poetry of Allen Ginsberg and creating our own songs and actions with Ginsberg's poetry. And if you've read Ginsberg's poetry, like, there's this incredible spiritual ferment throughout his work, his oeuvre, in his career, but also his life transformation. And in fact, everybody knows Howl or something like that, but to really go deeply into what a lot of people don't read the later books of Ginsberg. There, his most incredible work is really there, in my opinion. But so there was a great spiritual ferment that grew up within this company and within this team. And we were working with our master teachers and directors to help us open up to the processes that we were aspiring to embody. So, and that takes a lot of time. It's not something that you can just wish it into existence. And so now when I work with people too, after in a project you saw this month, it's you can't just be like, do this or something. I need to work with someone who's going to meet me from where they are. I will never try to impose anything of myself on somebody else, and someone else's content is strictly their own. But I know that we human beings are sensitive to forces that are inside us and outside us and that move through us. And so when certain people that I work with, they start to get touched with certain things, maybe they have some kind of intuition that this song or that song or something else can be a tool for them to touch something else inside of them, then we work on that together,
Yeah.
So it is, I'm not scared of the word spiritual. Sometimes the word spiritual can be like a blanket that is not very precise. I'm not scared of it though at the same time, because it's also frank. It's like, yeah, I have these spiritual desires. They don't have anything to do with my necessarily with Lloyd's ego, or with my monetary or other types of desires, or trying to achieve something necessarily in the arts. But I want to be, I don't know, to be connected in a certain way, right? I feel that, and then I talk with other people about that, and they seem to agree with me about it.
Don't
Even
we
if we
all?
have various different definitions for it, don't we all?
Yeah,
Right?
don't
Yeah.
we all?
So,
Yeah.
yeah, we never really get into conversations of religion in terms of this needs to be this or that needs to be that. Sometimes that can create issues, but I think it's also helpful to remember that religion, means religere, reconnection. Literally, that's what it means. So, yeah, will probably be throughout the course of this lifetime on an endless search to touch and to create work that can help reconnection for us, and for witnesses as well as people that are doing. Of course, it's much more important that there's really something done, so and it's not just something in our imagination, but it's something that is evident, is in evidence. You can understand that in the. It's harder to put your thumb on in something like theater or in music, right? Also because a performance happens and it's over. It's gone. So this whole notion of do it again, what does that mean? And how is it possible? And to repeat, of course, to rehearse in French is répétition. So this idea of to rehearse something, what are we rehearsing, and how can we work together in a way that our work together and for ourselves and for our inner wishes leads towards clarity, leads towards real clarity, of intention.
I'm fascinated by the idea that there's an objectivity to this, and that you could repeat something with such a profound spiritual effect, because I think we have this idea that such things just happen and you can't make them happen.
That's arbitrary.
Right. And I know you've spent years studying this, but I wonder if there are any components of it that you could talk about. How does that work?
Well, the components of that. So there is the what I would call the question here. It involves how to enter a deeper process. I'm going to need to probably define that, but a deeper process of my contact with something other. Now, so for example, maybe I don't know why, but there's a song that I work on, and every time I sing this song, there's this particular type of memory that comes up with me. Well, I might then work with someone on the outside who can start to help me as an actor, for example, start to work with those various questions. Okay, who is it? What is he or she doing? Where did you come from? Where are you going? These kind of Stanislavskian questions of the work of the actor, to start to clarify. Well, who is this person, and what is going on here? So, and I think all of my colleagues can point to many of their own types of experiences. I can kind of just speak deeply about my own, but so I remember working with this one piece with Mario's assistant director in our company for a while, and she had me doing the piece over and over again, and then there was a certain moment where she was like, no, stop, do that, just that little bit again, and I did it again, and something was starting to shake, and she I was trembling, and she was like, yeah, so say that again. And I said it again. She was like, deeper. And I said it again. She was like, from here. So I said it again. So she was helping me go to anchor the body on what started to happen there, right? And it was very odd. And after this experience, I cried for like, I don't know, 2 hours. But I like became my grandfather. It was like his voice, his full like mannerisms, everything just became him, you know? And it was really bizarre. But then it was like, okay, that was a lot. How do I go back to that tomorrow?
Yeah.
So now if you're going to be intelligent to go back to something, you don't go back and you're like, okay, just try to feel it again. It doesn't work like that. You need to have a lot more modesty and kind of like refine your various actions. So if like the day before I was doing something with my hand like him like this, I might come back the next day and be like, where was it? Oh, it was like this. It was here. Oh yeah, it was like this. Oh, and then I was like this. And so I'm finding, and then I might even start making notes and other things like this of what, little by little, what were the different actions. And when I don't know something, I don't know. That's okay. But little by little, I'm creating a score that I can come back to. There's mysterious places on that score, but I know I'm going to be. And then I know that I'm going to be trying to find again a certain kind of resonance of the voice, not trying to kind of imitate an intonation, but to find again physically, re-find again the physical and the vocal and the other type actions, the intentions, the little elements of behavior, the little. To even in the way of working in this very small way, like even getting down to the level of the impulses, so that those things start to become known. Various parts of them start to become known. And then through time and sincerity of working, you can go further and further and further. So there does start to become something that is, objective in the sense of, like, you watch an actor's work like that for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. You may not like what you see. You may be disturbed or this, that, or the other, but it's undeniable what you're watching. You're not going to be able to deny it. So yeah, I do think there's a possibility of this kind of objectivity, and there's different ways of reaching objectivity in the arts. This way is obviously different from, I mentioned Kathakali in India earlier, but like there's these incredible forms of art around the world where you start with the young child and the child learns to do all these movements with the body to become a supple vessel from a very early age. You kind of need to start early. It's hard to learn all that later on once the body is codified in its various habits. But in a way, those processes work from the outside in to really deeply be able to represent something. And there is an objectivity to that. I think the one that I was deeply attracted to and what I've been exploring for these years is something that is less concerned with the outer form of what it looks like, and concerned with the inner experience. And yes, there is a possibility of developing a line that can be very, very finely crafted from the inside like that. Yeah, too. And that is obviously also something unique to each person. It isn't something that, well, I think so. Like a very good actor could follow me what I did with my grandfather in that particular performance and do it, at least imitate it very, very well. I don't know. I'm just saying that I don't have any final definitions about any of these things, but yeah.
It's sort of amazing that there is this unique to each person aspect of it, but there's also this underlying connection between all of us, among all of us,
Yeah.
that this kind of art can offer.
Can touch.
Can
Yes.
touch.
And that we start to become a little more transparent.
Yeah.
When we're, and I think you can sense that, like even in Marion, when there's it's like, it's as if with some of these songs, it's like there's a subtle food in the air or something like this, where we're, even if you're not doing it, but you're witnessing it or you're part of it, you start to see, oh, it clears this divisions that we are subject to all the time. And it starts to open up a possibility of being able to see one another and hear one another in a way that is maybe more real, maybe more just as we are in all of our questions and vulnerability, right? So, and that's my experience, is that there, from that place, with the work on these songs, can that door can open up there, and from there you can really start to call something else. And if you start to call something else, well, be prepared for that to answer you. So that's kind of like, that's sort of what happens. And so unexpected things do happen, and then it's your responsibility to deal with them when they do.
The call
that's what I'll say
and the
about
response,
that.
right? Yeah.
Right.
Ability, responsibility.
Responsibility.
Right.
Yeah, very good word.
Yeah. In Marion, it was so beautiful how that happened in Marion, and I know that you issued that call. You and the group did, and you did it through call and response, and you told the community, many of these songs are call and response. We want you to participate. We want that, and they did. And tell me what that experience was like for you.
Oh, just like I told you in the early part of this interview that I went to these churches and things like this for years. I went to these different communities, but I guess, as you can imagine, people would talk to me during that time. And I had conversations with folks, and at times I did sing with them, but I was really green in all of this. But like, my dream of being able to come back here and with a group that had knew what it was doing, be able to come back with some of this material and touch some of these communities and see what would happen. I think you must understand how long I've wanted to do that. So this is 20 years of, and even in all these years at the Work Center, God, I want to go to Alabama, with our team, we go back there, sing some of these songs, and what's it going to be like for folks to hear some of that from maybe their parents, but coming from these strange weirdos from other parts of the world. but it's not so weird. I mean, we weren't. I don't think we were perceived as so weird. It was really it was very frank, very normal, and what was remarkable was how really seamless this work with the Visungos and the Southern songs is. You would think from the outset, those are two different traditions. Maybe that's not right to just mix them in with each other, but it just works, And so Lou and I were seeing this from the year before, and Sao Paulo was like, wow, this is really this is seamless. And I think it helps. I really do, because I think it helps in these areas. We also did performances in Tuskegee as well as in Marion, and when for people to experience, particularly the Visungos, and then to have the Southern, what we can call this, in shorthand we call the Southern songs, just to have a shorthand about them. I realize, of course, there's more specific names for the different kinds of these songs, whether spirituals or W. Du Bois called them the sorrow songs, but then the gulas culture might call them shouts.
Mm-hmm.
So we have different terms for different types of songs also that are woven in there, but shorthand we'll call them Southern songs. In any case, but for people to hear the Visungos, I think, or what I perceived, is that it's a little bit of like the experience of the uncanny double, you know? Like the twin, or you know what I mean? The uncanny quality of, like, I know this, but I don't know this.
Yeah.
What? And then how odd, how big is my own experience with this material? If it's this universal that it touches this whole other part of the globe, it just opens up these various windows, I think, in people. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter their educational background or something else like this. Mm-hmm. In fact, I know it doesn't. In fact, if you're more educated you are, you probably have like more blocks. But some of these folks in Marion, you know, they get it immediately, and then their participation is so immediate and beautiful and evident in its care.
Yeah.
And the tenderness, you know? So, and yeah, so that just felt so good to me. I mean, this way in which we were kind of witnessing each other in this profound way.
Yeah.
Without needing to spend much time talking about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and yeah, I mean, inshallah, I will be able to continue working with these parts of rural Alabama, go back there with people from this group and keep growing this. I think there's a lot that can be found in these communities. Very interested.
So much richness there.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been talking about Marion, and I also heard a performance and a conversation in Birmingham at East Village Arts, and I was looking back at my notes on the conversation and some of the beautiful poetic language that members of your group were using to describe that human connection that this music elicits. And I guess, is it, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Saloma had this beautiful description about slavery being a common experience at the root of a lot of this music. And he says slavery submitted people into situations where they became something different from human beings. But being human beings, actually, they continually have dreams and desires and feelings and wishes and thoughts. And then he comes back to this. What is the human? It's characterized by all these things, feelings and ideas and wishes and thoughts. And I think his point was partly that the songs express this, but they offer this kind of nourishment. He used this word also, nourishment.
Right.
And that, here's some of his language, some more of his language. African descendants that built this material, built the material richness of this contemporary world, were capable of surviving the violence of slavery and racism because they carried a lot of spiritual nutrients in this art, in this music. Right. Spiritual nutrients, I love that. And you connected, in that conversation, you connected it to the song, The Gourd, to drink water. Could you elaborate on that connection a little bit?
Certainly. So this idea of the water, I think the water being used as a metaphor for this spiritual nourishment in this. Oh wow, there's a couple of things I could say here. So yeah, with the gourd, giving the gourd for drink water, I don't. The other lines of the song are, I don't need a cup for snow water, and we're rolling, rolling, rolling under. Which I think that's it. That's the lines of the song. It's so funny with these songs because they can have like, I don't know, 15 words. You know what I mean? Like, but they have a way of, it's almost as if, you know, I can sing them and for months and months and months feel like I'm in a whole country, you know, like in the richness of being in a whole new country, like a field of various different impressions and experiences. And one day it's absolutely meaning this particular thing for me. It's not the kind of thing you can say it means this, but there are certain suggestive qualities here. I could say, for example, that rolling, rolling, rolling under maybe also has to do with the kind of a kind of dance walk that goes very, very well with this song. We didn't do this in this performances this summer, which has analogs in the Caribbean, Haiti, also in the shout, by the way, is not to call loudly in the Gula culture. It's a particular dance walk. So to roll under is also like it's like this dance walk prayer. Because you're literally rolling under with this movement. Okay, so maybe it's referring to that. I think probably is. I also think that it's also referring to the fact that the water goes underneath the earth and it comes back out again eventually, right? Yeah. With different springs, and it's from the springs that we're able to drink the most nourishing water. So there is a powerful image in here, which is like, we're dying and you're killing us. If we're thinking about slavery, this particular song is like for the Library of Congress, it's the oldest slave song that's been found, going back to the 1600s. I forget exactly the date, but it's like close to Jamestown. I mean, we're talking like, you know?
It's incredible.
Yeah. So the idea of like, we're gonna die, we're going down, but we're coming back. It's is connected to the water too, is deeply connected to the water in many of these African, let's say African or African diasporic songs. Wade the Water to My Knees is another one that we were working with. And yeah, in many songs, water has this metaphor of death, but also new life, right? It's funny that those two go together, like, but they do. Of course they do. I wanted to say also that, like, with Saloma's metaphor there, his speech there, that the African music created held these nutrients. So, but think about it for a minute. If those spiritual nutrients weren't carried in a certain vessel, in this case songs and traditions of singing and dancing and moving together and being together through song, and think about what we've been talking about with these older songs. They're like at the inner rhizome of what then became jazz, blues, all of this, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then soul, gospel, all of these different traditions are really going back to one. But think about what might have been the alternative. You know, we're used to our very white definition of like looking at the 60s, of like, where do you think that came from? The music that allowed people to start becoming so-called conscious in the 60s, all these bodies starting to wake up and be like, oh, I'm a person. I'm not a little robot mind thing programmed and acting this. No, I'm a human being and I have choices to make, and I don't like what my government's doing, for example. So that this consciousness this idea of a consciousness revolution, whether it happened or not in the 60s, I don't know, but I can say that there was a big change. It was a huge change. I mean, there's obviously the civil rights movement and everything too. Well, African Americans gave our country, everyone in this country, the possibility for that. Everyone. They saved the soul of this country. Like, we would probably, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we probably would have blown each other up in this century if it weren't for being saved by the various people that, by the culture that we are treating the worst in our country.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and yeah, you know, in these days I've been reading The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. And actually he writes about this quite specifically. He says, like, you know, he's writing, did you read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book in this last year? Yeah, so that, which is a little bit like tipping his hat to The Fire Next Time, because Fire Next Time is like it's an epistolary novel.
Yeah.
Like he's writing to his young nephew,
Yeah.
he calls him. You sort of perceive that he's writing to himself as a young man too, but like, but he says exactly this. He says, we have to save them. We have to save them from themselves. This is what we've been doing, and it's what we must keep doing.
Yeah.
So, Saloma's very modest about it, and I think it is important to be modest about it. But it's very important to, I don't know, to be outspoken about these matters and about what hasn't been told about these stories, you know. And I know that there's many things that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to position myself here as like as an expert, and I'm not on those questions. I'm one that is in the process of investigating and researching and will continue. But I do think that there's a deep quality that you face in relation to this type of music too, that it starts to kind of right the scales a little bit, because by its very nature they start to ask you to confront certain questions, intimate questions, but then also social questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. And there is this deep connection between intimate questions and social questions.
Yes.
Isn't there?
And it's particularly in the Black church, and in that those things were never separated.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We're the ones that try to separate them. Yeah. Oh, this is a good connection here. Let's see. This is Luciano talking. He says, I thought this was very generous of him to say this. For white people to sing these songs can be an awakening, not appropriation. I thought that was so generous of him to say that, because he also had such poetic language, this richness, this diamond of the spirit, and then songs are sweet weapons or sharp weapons to open possibilities. And I wonder what your thoughts are on awakening versus appropriation. And how you reconcile those.
Yeah, and this is it's a very important question, and it's one that I will answer. I will probably answer in different ways as I go along in my experience, and I have to different people at different times, because I don't think that there's just a catch-all, be-all answer to this, because I can say, okay, this is appropriation and this is not, and we can try to define that, but exceptions are going to arise on one side or the other. And I think that when certain things are being appropriated not in the right spirit, or something has an exploitative quality in one way or another, we must call that out, and we must open up the conversation. And it's really there when I'm working with others and things like this too. Obviously, I'm a white man, like there's gonna be some questions around this, like, you know, who are you to be working with this material? Is gonna it can and it has and it always will come up for me in my career. I what to say? Yeah, what Lou said is really beautiful. It can be an awakening. It doesn't have to be appropriation. I think that there should be a fundamental modesty around a lot of these matters. It's pretty evident to anyone, first of all, that we're not dealing, in this particular case, with pop songs, you know? We're not dealing with, we are dealing with songs that have some, I don't know, weight behind them in a way, right? There's this, not that it's a heavy weight, but I'm saying like some gravity, some, this mystery around them too, and the sense of something having been passed on for generations and generations and generations. Wow, you know? So, I mean, clearly part of this is just like the reason we get into so much questions of appropriation is just there's not generally enough humility faced to material that people might be working on, and that's an essential element. It's absolutely an essential element, and a modesty about one's own capacities faced to this kind of material too. And I think in between those two things is another word which is hard to define, which is sincerity. We know it when we're like, but it's like with sincerity, you know it when you see it. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, now this person's sincere in what he's doing with this work. Like, we mentioned the subject about transparency, of people becoming a little more transparent. That's when you know I'm sincere. If I don't have anything to hide. So, but I'm putting that there to be tested. I want it to be tested. I'm very happy to have this conversation anytime that it comes up. I do think there's another, you know, on the one hand, we're looking at something that's like this fundamental modesty and sincerity. But on the other hand, there is something in the nature of like what needs to be a genuine penetration into someone's craft too. Like, because the sincerity isn't just enough. You know, you could be really sincere and your work be bad.
Right.
And if that's the case, then people will go, oh, you should not be doing this.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You know? And then, I mean, this is obviously the case with certain pop culture figures, things like this too. But I don't want to go down that road right now. But it's but with the idea of penetration in your craft, like how deeply have you learned how to do what it is that you're doing? How seriously have you taken this? Have you worked on this for years so that you know in every detail what it is you're working on? Right? Like, I certainly wouldn't consider myself like able to be able to lead something like this if I hadn't spent so much time. But as I said before too, it's not like I consider myself an expert or consider the work having been done. It's never done. That would be immodest of me and would contradict the other side. So I don't know if there's there's not a blanket response to like what is appropriation and what is not. I have a colleague who like did a singing who's like very much like me. He's from South America and is Latino, but was working on Afro-Latino Caribbean songs with some young people in New Mexico recently, and some of them were Native American, and they had a really hard time with this work session. And some of them were crying and like didn't want to sing, didn't even really want to get started singing with them. And one of the things that they said was like, you know, you're going to try to take our songs too. That's the last thing that you could take from us. And I don't think that was fair of towards my colleagues, but I understand that there's a lot of raw feeling out there. One thing that disappointed me about this experience was I was like, so you guys then had this painful conversation for how long? He was like, oh, about 50 minutes, something like this. I was like, did you sing after that? He was like, no, we never sang. And I was like, oh, well, that's the real tragedy. Because, like, yes, have the conversation. Yes, delve into these things. Yes, please, let's get everything out there. But sing together, please. Like, we're still... we also live in a time where we've a little bit, more than a little bit, like fetishized things like singing, dancing. You know, it's like only the people who are really good at it, that have their nice videos on YouTube or whatever, like should be singing and dancing. Particularly in North America, you feel this way, but in other parts of the world too. It's like, oh no, I'm not a singer. I can't sing. Singing is like making your breakfast. Singing and dancing is like walking. Dancing is like brushing your teeth. I mean, and the quality actually of hearing some in these old recordings is that you hear just how normal this is for everyone. They're not trying to like make something out of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You feel the organicity of that normalcy in the recordings. Anyway.
I'm so glad that you said that personally, because it blesses part of my experience in Marion when you were doing the If I Had My Way song, and Hita comes over and she's trying to get everybody involved, and she says, okay, it's your turn, and so everybody can make up your own verse, and what would you do if you had your way? And she's inviting people, and so the rest of the community there seemed so comfortable doing that, and I didn't, I'm not a singer. Right. Don't consider I can sing, but I really didn't consider myself the kind of singer in the rest of the room, and I'm not used to a call and response tradition in my own church. And so that it's I'm a church organist, and so it's a very different thing, I play the organ for other people to sing. And, so it was very much outside my own tradition, although I had this beautiful experience while I was there listening and recording. And I was, I guess I was there, first of all, as a researcher to find out about what you were doing, but the experience turned into a very personal one for me. And so when she came and invited me to sing with her body language, the thing that came out of me, the response that came out of me was love. This is just this overwhelming experience of love that this music brings. And I didn't feel like my singing voice was a musical contribution to the experience, but I did feel that my experience was part of it. And,
absolutely.
It was this response of love, which was really welcome. So thank you for the blessing of the normalcy of singing, even if you're not a singer, capital S.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I have a collection of these songs from G's Ben. There were moments that really helped me see some of this. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine now because people used to sing in much more, like all the time, as the way I imagine it. I mean, so many more different situations in life. Like we mentioned work songs and other things like this, but just around the house, like maybe not every culture, and maybe not everybody's family, but I just imagine being something I not only imagine, I have a lot of evidence this is something so much more normal if you go back 100 years ago, and before, and all my travels now too, like in various parts of the world, where in certain rural places, yeah, these things are still kind of going, and you see like where you don't have to like you don't have to even poke very much, and somebody will just start singing a song, and then these other people will start joining in, and you're just like, you kind of are just sort of like a little bit kind of like a wink, like, hey, would you do this? And they'll go for it. And we don't have that. I don't know, that kind of it's such a beautiful quality, and it's like we're, as human beings, it's like we're cruel in a way towards our own heritage and towards our own possibilities as human beings. Of course, in the music we're talking about here right now, all of this is complicated by questions of race. Because what happens? This is a theory, but what happens when you denigrate these other people this much? Who is really suffering? Who really starts to suffer? Who loses contact with who they are and with God, if we want to use a big word, and with spirit and with their bodies? So it's not surprising that that's been that way, but that African American music has we need it, like we need, food or water to help us like restore the balance. And to go back to what you were saying again there too, with like white, like Luciano said, like this can be an awakening experience for white people. I hope so. And I don't want to get into necessarily the loftiness of like let's heal. It's a healing experience. It's not my job. Let me put it that way. But I have seen incredible experiences of healing go on between different groups, different people in the course of these years of working with these songs. So like, I know many things that are possible. Yeah.
It strikes me that sometimes you're like the gourd that's carrying the water.
A little bit like that. And that makes me think of something, which is the songs. Is that you're in relationship with something then. It's like you're in relationship with a song. Is like a song like the in the field of songs we're talking about. Although again, I don't know. Maybe if I really, really, really loved, I don't say that it can't be possible with a pop song or something like that. Like, I turned "Hit Me Baby One More Time" by Britney Spears into like my spiritual ode of talking to God. It is possible. It is possible. Garcia Lorca, the Federico Garcia Lorca, the poet, spoke and has these lectures, the Duende lectures that he gave in Cuba in the last year or two before he died, or was murdered rather. He spoke about like the most moving experience he ever had of song in his life was a 12-year-old girl walking through the streets of Madrid, and she was singing like a trashy a Britney Spears like pop song of the day, and just fully like absolutely and utterly transformed.
Interesting.
And so it's not impossible that any material could ignite into something else, but these particular songs, like I do view it as this relationship. It's this ongoing relationship, and like in any relationship, you have to give give yourself over and over and over again. If you want to receive, you've got to be giving yourself over and over again. It's there's a call and response between you and the songs. So you're carrying them as long as you are working actively to serve something there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And yeah, like I couldn't and I won't like turn, I wouldn't like create a record or something like this where I like turn this kind of material into like, okay, Lloyd Bricken and band go and perform these songs. Like, it can't work like that,
Yeah.
They are for something else.
You've given me so much today. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you wish I had, or anything else that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to?
No, I don't really feel like that right now. I'm sure we can have I'm sure it will. I hope it will be the first of several conversations.
I do too, actually. Yeah, I do too. Yeah. Because I think this is just such a big thing, and I think that we can't we can only skim the surface. But I'd love to have opportunities to go a little bit deeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.